An avoidance breaking point often isn't triggered by your anger, your tear, or even your final argument. It's triggered by your calm detachment. Because calm detachment removes the invisible safety net that has been protecting their pattern for longer than they realized. For a long time, your love may have been doing the work of stability in the background. You were the one who reached out after silence. You were the one who tried to understand what wasn't being explained. You were the one who softened your needs so they wouldn't feel pressured. You were the one who carried hope like a lantern through the fog of mixed signals. And every time you did that, you weren't just loving them. You were cushioning the consequences of their emotional distance. That is the safety net. Not your weakness, your endurance, your empathy, your willingness to keep the bond alive, even when they weren't fully present inside it. Avoidants are not always consciously calculating. Many are operating from a nervous system that learned to survive intimacy by pulling back. When closeness intensifies, they deactivate. When emotions get heavy, they detach. When accountability approaches, they retreat into silence or logic or space. And in a healthy relationship, a little space can be normal. But in a repeating avoidance cycle, space becomes escape, and escape becomes a lifestyle. The pattern survives when the other partner keeps rebuilding the bridge after every emotional collapse. You become the bridge. That is why an avoidant can stay half in, half out for so long without truly facing the cost. Your love keeps the relationship from fully reflecting reality back to them. Then your energy changes, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, unnatural way that the avoidant can feel in their bones. You stop chasing. You stop asking the same question in 10 different tones. You stop waiting for the bare minimum to feel like a miracle. You stop rushing to repair what they break with distance. You stop doing the emotional CPR that has been keeping the connection breathing. You might still care, but the frantic urgency is gone, and the avoidant doesn't interpret that as maturity first. They interpret it as danger. Because for the first time, their nervous system can't rely on your predictable rescue. The system they unconsciously depended on, I can retreat and they'll still hold us together, stops working. This is when the breaking point begins. It is not always loud, it is not always immediate, but it is profound. Because they are now facing the raw version of reality without your cushioning. Your calm detachment tells the truth in a way emotional pleading never could. Pleading still shows investment. Pleading still forms a rope they can hold on to, even if they pretend they don't need it. Calm detachment removes the rope. It says, I have loved you with patience. And the pattern hasn't evolved. It says, I'm done negotiating with inconsistency. It says, your fear is no longer allowed to cost me my peace. You may not even say these words out loud, but your nervous system speaks them clearly through your behavior. This is why avoidants can handle conflict better than they can handle your calm silence. Conflict still keeps the relationship in motion. Calm silence freezes the cycle. And when the cycle freezes, the avoidant is forced to feel what they avoided. They start replaying moments that didn't register fully when your love was still cushioning everything. The times you reached out and they waited too long. The times you needed reassurance and they offered distance. The times you tried to connect and they treated it like pressure. The times you held back your pain because you didn't want to be too much. Suddenly, they can't reduce your hurt into overthinking because your calm detachment is not a debate. It's a boundary with quiet finality. Your detachment also exposes the truth of their influence. They may realize how much of your emotional stability has been sacrificed to keep them comfortable. How many times you adjusted your voice, your expectations, your needs just to avoid the cold shutdown. How much of the relationship's warmth came from your willingness to keep loving even when you felt lonely inside the connection. That realization can trigger shame, grief, and fear. Not because they are evil, but because they finally understand that a person can be loving and still leave when the pattern becomes unsafe. And this is where your power becomes clean. You are not trying to hurt them. You are refusing to hurt yourself. You are not collapsing the relationship. You are refusing to be the only one preventing its collapse. You are allowing the relationship to show its true shape, now that your emotional labor is no longer filling in the missing pieces. For some avoidants, this moment becomes the start of growth. They begin to see that love requires presence, not just feelings. They begin to recognize that your boundaries are not punishment. They are the cost of emotional safety. They may finally understand that you weren't asking for perfection, you were asking for consistency. For others, the pattern may try to return with panic, big apologies, sudden tenderness, promises that sound beautiful because they're delivered with urgency. Your calm detachment is what keeps you wise here. It helps you remember that real change is not how intensely they show up when they fear losing you, but how consistently they show up when love is calm and ordinary and demands everyday courage. Your emotional shutdown was not a sudden switch you flipped to be dramatic, cold, or teach them a lesson. It was a slow, quiet erosion that happened while you were still trying. That's what makes it so heartbreaking. You didn't stop loving them overnight. You stopped surviving the imbalance. Most avoidants don't realize how close an empath can be to the edge because empaths rarely announce the countdown. You kept showing up with grace. You kept choosing understanding. You kept doing emotional math in your head to make their distance feel less personal. You told yourself they were stressed, overwhelmed, scared, not ready, misunderstood. And sometimes those things were true. But even when the reasons were understandable, the impact was still real. You were left carrying the emptiness. Unmet needs don't just hurt once. They accumulate. They teach your nervous system a pattern. The pattern says, when I reach for closeness, I may be met with silence. When I ask for reassurance, I may be labeled as too much. When I need repair, I may be left alone to process the damage. After enough repetitions, your body starts preparing for disappointment before your mind wants to admit it. You begin to brace, even in good moments. You begin to limit your hope so the next withdrawal doesn't destroy you. That's not you being negative. That's you adapting. Invisible loneliness is one of the most painful parts of this dynamic. From the outside, it might look like you're still together, still talking, still functioning. But inside, you can feel emotionally alone. You can feel like you're in a relationship with someone who is physically present but emotionally guarded, someone who can share time with you but struggles to share emotional availability when it really matters. That kind of loneliness is confusing because it doesn't have one clear event to blame. It's 1,000 tiny disconnections. It's the lack of softness after conflict. It's the delayed reply when you're hurting. It's the way your vulnerability lands and then disappears into a quiet wall. And because you're empathetic, you keep trying to be easy to love. You soften your needs. You reduce your expectations. You package your feelings in the gentlest tone possible. You become careful with your words. Like love is a fragile glass that might shatter if you speak too directly. Over time, this turns into self-editing. And self-editing turns into self-abandonment. You start losing your emotional voice inside your own relationship. You don't stop feeling. You stop expressing. Because the cost of expression has become emotional distance. One-sided repair is where your heart really gets exhausted. Because you can tolerate a lot if you see growth. You can be patient if you feel mutual effort. But when you're always the one reopening the conversation, always the one calming the chaos, always the one initiating the healing, it starts to feel like love is something you're building alone. You find yourself apologizing for having needs. You find yourself explaining the same wound again and again. You find yourself fighting for emotional basics that shouldn't require a negotiation. And then comes the moment you don't even want to explain anymore, not because you don't care, because you've explained enough to know the issue isn't confusion. The issue is capacity, willingness, or pattern. This is the moment your emotional shutdown begins to look like calm detachment. It's not rage. It's not revenge. It's your nervous system finally choosing rest. You stop chasing clarity. You stop demanding empathy from someone who repeatedly struggles to hold your emotions safely. You stop believing that your patience has unlimited reserves. There's a quiet dignity that arrives when you realize that love is not supposed to feel like emotional hunger. Avoidants can misinterpret this phase. They might think you're suddenly cold. They might say you changed out of nowhere. But your change had a timeline. It had a history. It was built on all the times you reached out and felt unseen, all the times you tried to repair and felt alone, all the times you lowered your needs to keep the peace. The truth is, your heart didn't shut down first. Your hope did. And when hope goes quiet, the heart often follows to protect itself. This is why your emotional shutdown is not a weakness. It's a self-protective intelligence. It's your inner system saying, I can't keep paying for love with my peace. It's your growth refusing to be dragged backward by a cycle that keeps resetting after every brief moment of closeness. It's you finally choosing the kind of safety you kept trying to build with someone who wasn't building it with you. And if they ever want to repair that, the path is not dramatic declarations. It's consistent presence. It's accountability without defensiveness. It's emotional effort that shows up before you break, not after. Because your shutdown didn't come from one big moment. It came from too many small moments where love wasn't matched with the care you needed to feel safe. An avoidant may feel deep shame and real grief when they finally realize your heart is closing, because this is the moment their usual defenses stop working. For a long time, distance felt like safety. Silence felt like control. Avoiding the hard conversation felt like peace. And maybe even you helped soften the truth for them, because you loved them, because you didn't want to be too much, because you understood their past, because you believed patience could build a bridge strong enough to hold both of you. But when your energy changes, when your words get fewer, when your eyes stop asking, when your nervous system stops auditioning for reassurance, the reality becomes undeniable. The bond is no longer being carried by your effort alone. Shame isn't always loud. Sometimes shame is a quiet internal collapse. It's the moment they put together the sequence. You reached, they retreated. You tried, they minimized. You asked for clarity. They offered confusion. You tried to repair. They disappeared. Shame is the uncomfortable truth that your pain wasn't hypothetical. It was lived. It was repeated, and it wasn't caused by one mistake, but by a habitual choice to choose self-protection over relational responsibility. Grief then follows because they begin to understand what your love actually was. Not a guaranteed resource, not a convenient emotional home they could walk into and out of whenever they wanted, but something rare, steady, emotionally intelligent, and deeply generous. This is often the moment an avoidant recognizes that you weren't naive, you weren't blind, you were graceful. You gave them time, you gave them space, you gave them chances to rise into a healthier kind of love. Your compassion became the quiet cushion that kept the relationship from cracking fully open. So when your heart finally starts closing, they don't just fear losing you. They fear losing the version of themselves that felt safer because you kept making things survivable. But here is the truth that protects you. Regret is not the same as readiness. Regret is a feeling. Readiness is a capacity. Regret can arrive fast and burn bright. Readiness is slow, practical, and proven over time. Regret might sound like a powerful apology at midnight. Readiness looks like accountability at noon on an ordinary Tuesday. Regret can create a surge of affection when they fear you're slipping away. Readiness creates consistent effort even when you are calm again, even when there is no crisis forcing their nervous system to wake up. This is where many hearts get trapped, because you've been starving for emotional safety, so when they finally show emotion, it feels like water in a desert. They may say, "I didn't realize, I was scared. I never meant to hurt you, you mattered more than I admitted," and these words can be sincere. But sincerity is not structure. A person can feel genuine remorse and still not have the skills to stay present. Through intimacy, conflict, and routine emotional responsibility, they can cry about the damage and still repeat the pattern when vulnerability gets uncomfortable again. So the higher question isn't, do they feel bad? The higher question is, can they do better? Can they name their triggers without using them as excuses? Can they communicate before distance becomes punishment? Can they offer reassurance without labeling your needs as pressure? Can they stay emotionally engaged when you are hurt instead of disappearing until the moment passes? Can they practice repair as a habit, not a performance? Because readiness reveals itself in repetition, in consistency, in the quiet responsibility of someone who doesn't need to be afraid of losing you to treat you like you matter. Your strength here is not to become cold. Your strength is to become clear. You don't have to punish their regret. You simply have to stop letting regret buy instant access to your heart. If they are truly ready, they won't demand a rushed reset. They won't guilt you into reopening too soon. They will respect your pace. They will understand that trust is rebuilt through steady evidence, not emotional speeches. They will show up not just when they feel desperate, but when love requires discipline. And if they aren't ready, your boundary is still a win, because your heart closing wasn't random. It was protection. It was built by too many nights of invisible loneliness, too many cycles of one-sided repair, too many moments where you had to carry the emotional weight alone. You are allowed to honor that reality. You are allowed to let their regret be real without letting it become your responsibility. You are allowed to choose emotional safety over emotional hope. The real measure of change is what they do when everything is calm, not what they do when they're terrified of losing you. Because panic can make anyone look transformed for a moment. Panic can make an avoidant suddenly text you all day, apologize with emotion, promise the future, cry about the past, speak with the tenderness you've been begging for. And if you've been hurting for a long time, that intensity can feel like the miracle you've waited for. But the uncomfortable truth is this: panic is not proof of emotional capacity. Panic is proof of emotional threat. Avoidants often move toward you fastest when your energy feels unreachable, when you get quiet, when you detach, when your boundaries finally become real. In that moment, their fear of loss can temporarily overpower their fear of intimacy. They can show up with urgency because the relationship has become a crisis. And crises create short-term bravery. But short-term bravery is not the same as long-term safety. The question isn't whether they can act loving when their ego and fear are activated. The question is whether they can act loving when there is nothing dramatic pushing them to perform that love. Because real change is not an emergency response. Real change is an identity shift. If they've truly grown, you'll see it in the boring moments. You'll see it in the everyday consistency. You'll see it in the way they communicate before things break, not after. You'll see it in the way they check in without being prompted. You'll see it in the way they tolerate emotional closeness without disappearing in the way they stay present in conversation instead of retreating into silence and calling it space. You'll see it in how they repair small misunderstandings quickly instead of letting them become emotional injuries that you have to carry alone. This is why calm moments are the proof of maturity. When no one is panicking, when no one is chasing, when no one is threatening to leave, the avoidant's true relationship skills are revealed. Can they be consistent? Can they be emotionally available without needing a dramatic catalyst? Can they own their impact without you coaching them into accountability? Can they offer reassurance without labeling your needs as pressure? Can they show up not just with affection, but with reliability? Panic-driven intensity often follows a predictable arc. It comes in waves. They miss you. They fear losing you. They flood you with closeness. You soften. You hope. The relationship stabilizes. The threat dissolves. And then slowly the pattern tries to return. The check-ins fade. The emotional presence becomes inconsistent again. The same old distance shows up wearing a new excuse. That doesn't mean they never cared. It means fear temporarily improved their behavior. But growth didn't permanently change it. And this is the trap for the loving heart. Because you want to believe the emotional peak was the new reality. You want to believe the intensity was transformation. You want to believe the apology erased the pattern. But patterns don't break with words alone. They break with repeated behaviors that prove a new way of being. So the healthiest thing you can do is slow down the timeline, not to punish them, not to test them with games, but to protect truth. If they are truly changing, they won't pressure you to reset instantly. They won't demand immediate trust. They won't treat your caution like betrayal. They will respect your pace because they understand the cost of what you survived. They will show you that their presence is not a temporary rescue mission. They will show you they can be stable. Even when you are not disappearing, not threatening, not withdrawing, they will do the quiet work. And the quiet work matters more than the emotional performance. It's the work of repairing without defensiveness. The work of showing up before you break. The work of making you feel emotionally safe in ordinary life. The work of staying engaged when love is not dramatic. The work of learning to be consistent because they choose to be, not because they are afraid. This keynote is not telling you to become cynical. It's telling you to become wise because your heart didn't get destroyed in one single moment. It got wounded over time, through repeated emotional absences, through the loneliness of being the one who cared. Out loud, through the exhaustion of having to translate love into effort when effort should have been mutual. So your healing must also be time-based, evidence-based, pattern-based. You are allowed to want love that doesn't need a crisis to be kind to you. You are allowed to require a partner who doesn't wake up only when you leave. You are allowed to expect repair that doesn't rely on panic. Because the most secure love is not the one that comes rushing in at the last second. The most secure love is the one that never makes you reach a breaking point to be valued in the first place. Your breaking point is sacred because it is the moment you stop financing a cycle where your love keeps absorbing the cost of their distance. For so long, the relationship may have survived on your emotional spending. You paid with patience. You paid with understanding. You paid with late-night overthinking, with softening your needs, with explaining your hurt in the gentlest possible language, hoping your kindness would make it easier for them to stay present. And every time they pulled away, your heart stepped forward like a loyal investor in a future that kept getting delayed. You didn't just love them. You subsidized the relationship. You filled in the emotional gaps. You smoothed the rupture. You made inconsistency feel survivable. You kept the story alive, even when the evidence was asking you to stop rewriting reality. This is the part people don't see. They think a breaking point is dramatic. But in this dynamic, the real breaking point is often quiet. It's the moment you realize your love has been serving as emotional insurance that protects their pattern from consequence. When an avoidant withdraws, the natural result should be a relational cost, not punishment, not cruelty, But a simple truth, intimacy weakens when emotional presence is repeatedly withheld. But your love, your empathy, your readiness to repair can unintentionally reduce that cost. You chase clarity. You restore warmth. You reopen the conversation. You accept partial effort because your hope is bigger than your pain. So the pattern learns it can continue without evolving. Your care becomes the cushion that prevents the relationship from reflecting the full weight of their distance back to them. You were never wrong for loving like that. It speaks to your character. But the price is that your nervous system becomes the currency of the relationship. The more they retreat, the more your body stays alert. The more they go cold, the more your heart works over time to bring heat back. You start living in emotional compensation. You don't just want love, you manage love. You don't just hope for connection. You strategize how not to trigger their shutdown. You become an expert in reading silence. You learn to shrink a need into a suggestion. You learn to carry loneliness quietly so you won't seem too much. That is what it means to finance the cycle. Your emotional labor is paying the bill for a dynamic that isn't equally funded. Your breaking point is sacred because it's the day you stop paying that bill. It's the moment you understand that love can't be a one-person economy, that your warmth should not be used to cover someone else's consistent absence, that your empathy is not a substitute for their accountability, that your patience is not an agreement to tolerate a pattern that keeps damaging your peace. The sacredness isn't in the pain itself. The sacredness is in what your pain finally teaches you. It teaches you that you don't need to be stronger than the relationship's imbalance. You need to be loyal to your emotional safety. This is often where avoidance gets exposed for what it really is in the relationship. Not independence, not calmness, not needing space, but a repeated refusal to build intimacy through discomfort. Because intimacy requires emotional risk. It requires repair. It requires a willingness to be seen. And when one partner consistently chooses distance at the exact moment's closeness is needed most, the other partner inevitably becomes the emotional overfunctioner. You are the one who keeps the connection alive through your hope, your grace, your ability to self-soothe what should have been co-soothed. That might make you admirable, but it also makes you exhausted. So the moment you stop financing this cycle, it can feel like guilt. It can feel like grief. It can feel like betrayal of the love you had been trying to protect, but it is actually devotion to what love is supposed to be. Mutual, safe, steady. You are not giving up on love. You are giving up on the version of love that requires you to abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And here is the powerful shift this creates. Your breaking point changes your energy from negotiation to truth. You stop trying to convince them your needs are valid. You stop asking for reassurance the way someone asks for oxygen. You stop resetting the relationship after every small return. You stop rewarding panic-driven closeness that fades once the threat of loss disappears. You begin to require consistency as a baseline, not a rare event you celebrate like a holiday. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become clear. You can still care about them and refuse the pattern. You can still understand their wounds and refuse to let those wounds become your permanent environment. You can still hold compassion and say, with your behavior, I won't be the emotional life support of a relationship that only thrives when I am overgiving. That is the sacred boundary, because what your breaking point really protects is your future self. The version of you who won't normalize mixed signals. The version of you who won't mistake emotional spikes for real change. The version of you who won't call anxiety chemistry and inconsistency depth. The version of you who finally understands that the greatest love you can offer is not endless tolerance, but a standard that requires two people to show up with courage. So yes, your breaking point is painful, but it is also wholly in the most human way. It is your self-respect returning to the center of the story. It is the moment your love finally stops paying for someone else's avoidance. It is the moment you choose emotional safety over emotional suspense. And that choice doesn't just change this relationship. It changes the kind of relationships you will ever allow again. You don't need an avoidant to collapse to validate your value, because your value was never created by their realization in the first place. It was there before they understood you. It was there when they were worn and inconsistent. It was there when they were distant and confused. It was there in the nights you held your own tears quietly. In the days you tried to love with grace while feeling emotionally alone. The moment you start needing their emotional breakdown as proof that you matter. You hand your self-worth to the person whose pattern already hurt you. You turn your healing into a waiting room. You begin measuring your sanity, your reality, your heartbreak against their ability to admit what they did. And that is how a good heart gets trapped in a loop that looks like loyalty, but functions like self-abandonment. An avoidant collapsing can feel like the moment you've been praying for. It can look like regret, big apologies, intense longing, emotional vulnerability that appears out of nowhere. And to a heart that has been starving, that can feel like rescue. But collapse is not the same as capacity. A person can break emotionally because they fear the loss of you, not because they have learned how to love you safely. They can cry because your absence threatens their identity, not because they are ready to build the daily habits that protect your nervous system. They can return with intensity because panic temporarily overrides their avoidance. But panic is not a relationship plan. It's a nervous system emergency. This is why your healing must be rooted in something stronger than their late realization. If your peace depends on them finally saying the perfect words, you will keep revisiting the injury every time they fail to say them. If your closure depends on their confession, you will stay emotionally attached to the part of the story that keeps you waiting. But your heart deserves a healthier authority. Your heart deserves to be believed by you. Your pain was real before they acknowledged it. Your loneliness mattered before they regretted it. Your needs were valid even when they labeled them as pressure. Choosing emotional safety over emotional hope is the moment you stop romanticizing inconsistency. Hope is beautiful. Hope is what makes you compassionate, patient, and willing to see the best in someone. But hope becomes dangerous when it asks you to override events. Emotional safety is not a mood. It is not a temporary wave of affection. It is not a promise made during a panic. Emotional safety is the consistent experience of being able to trust that your feelings will be met with care, that conflict will be met with repair, that closeness will not be punished with withdrawal. It's your body knowing it doesn't have to brace for the next emotional disappearance. This keynote is about your internal upgrade, because the biggest shift in avoidant dynamics isn't always what they do, it's what you stop allowing. You stop treating uncertainty as a normal cost of love. You stop accepting crumbs as proof of devotion. You stop being pulled back into cycles where their fear decides your reality. And you begin to live by a standard that protects the part of you that used to keep bleeding quietly for love. Emotional hope tends to say, maybe this time will be different. Emotional safety asks, what has been consistently true? Emotional hope focuses on potential. Emotional safety focuses on patterns. Emotional hope can keep you attached to the future version of someone who may never arrive. Emotional safety anchors you in the present truth of how you are actually being treated. And that distinction is not cold. It is wise. When you choose safety, you don't suddenly stop caring. You stop bargaining. You stop performing emotional strength for two people. You stop translating silence into justification. You stop resetting the relationship after every brief return without real accountability. Your standards become less about what you say and more about what you no longer tolerate. And that's when your nervous system begins to heal, because your body cannot recover, while your heart keeps re-entering the same injury cycle. This is also where the mythology around making them realize starts to dissolve. You don't need the dramatic moment where they fall apart and say you were their greatest loss. Your life is not a stage designed to teach someone else a lesson. Your life is yours. Your healing is yours. Your worth is yours. And if someone grows because your boundaries finally forced reality into view, that's meaningful. But it is not your responsibility to stay in pain long enough to become someone's awakening. The most empowering truth is that your healing begins the moment you stop needing permission to move forward. You stop asking your heart to wait for an apology that might not come. You stop hoping that their regret will transform into consistency. You stop letting your story depend on their emotional timing. You choose yourself, not in anger, but in clarity. You begin to rebuild your identity around a simple truth that changes everything. Love that costs you your peace is not love you are required to keep. And when you hold that line, something beautiful happens inside you. You stop being impressed by intensity and start being devoted to stability. You stop chasing the feeling of being wanted, start requiring the experience of being cared for. You stop mistaking emotional spikes for transformation and start honoring the quiet, repeated behaviors that actually create trust. You become the kind of person who doesn't need someone to collapse to finally feel chosen, because you already chose yourself, and that choice becomes the foundation of every healthy love you allow next.